Hi, Ableton just came out with a new synth instrument called Drift that everyone with Live 11 gets for free. I've been playing with it for the past week and I wanted to share my impressions and show off some of the key features in this new instrument. Now, there's a lot of really great synth plugins out there already, but there's a few things nice about Drift that make it stand out. First, the interface is really clean, so everything is laid out nicely on one screen, which you don't get in Ableton's other synthesizer instruments. It also has some nice visualization tools that you don't get in either analog or an operator. And two, because of the nice interface, it's really quick and easy to use, and I find I'm able to dial in sounds I want really quickly using this instrument versus some of the other alternatives. Three, it has some really nice filters that sound really great, which I'll demonstrate a little bit later. Four, it has a couple of different modes and the drift feature, which is a key feature of this instrument that let you shape a sound very quickly without having to dive into a complicated bond matrix. And last, it's really lightweight and uses very minimal CPU. Now, I know a lot of people probably saw this instrument when it first came out and thought, well, the fucking analog already does the same shit already, and the fucking wavetable has a better mod matrix, and why don't Ableton work on pitch correction instead? Bullshit. That's what you sound like. But in my opinion, regardless of all that, which is kind of true, I acknowledge, I think I'm going to use Drift all the time. And for a lot of things that I used to use analog or operator or wavetable for, I think Drift is a really good alternative because it's just deep enough to give all the features that really make sense for a classic analog synthesizer sound. And it has a really nice interface that's really easy to work with. And I think, basically any common subtractive synth sound can be made using Drift, in my opinion. And if I have like a sound like that in my head, I think I can probably get to it faster using Drift than I can using anything else. All right, let's make some noise. So I've got a fresh instance of Drift down here on this track, and let's just make some bass sounds to start with. So by default, it sounds like that, and it's actually a pretty serviceable bass sound if you just start messing with the filter. So I think I'll start off by talking about the filters on Drift, which are really cool. So we'll bring the cutoff down, we'll bring the resonance up, we'll make a more plucky sound, so we'll bring the sustain sounds on our envelopes too. And we get something kind of like that, but then let's add some filter modulation with envelope 2 here. And we're getting somewhere now. So Drift gives you two filters. So filter 1 is a 12 dB per octave. Filter 2 is a 24 dB per octave. And I think the filters sound great in this instrument. And in particular, I think they have their own, they kind of have their own unique character in how they behave when they're overdriven, and how they interact with the resonance, of how the resonance interacts with the different waveforms. So kudos to Ableton for giving us some nice filters to play with here. So we've got key tracking. Of course, it's like really easy to implement there. The filters will self-oscillate if you crank the resonance up. They'll also produce a nice overdrive sound if you crank up the amount of signal going into the filter from the two oscillators here. And then they did a good job of making it actually really apparent and not too subtle. I find sometimes like filter overdrive in some senses just so subtle that you barely notice it. In this case, they did a really good job of implementing filter overdrive without making it too obnoxious. So that's the filters. I think I'll stick with filter 1 for now. We've got in our oscillator section, so we've got a saw and a sub sine wave, 1 octave down in the default instance. We can, of course, change the oscillator type to any number of options for oscillator 2, so we can stack a saw and a pulse wave, kind of like that. I'll just make them the same. I'll make them the same octave for now. But now I want to go over to the global section here and make my bass sound a little bit more, a little bit thicker. And I'll do that by going into going to the mode section here and going to a monophone, the mono mode. So most bass sounds are, pretty much always monophonic. So by putting it in mono mode, it gives us an option down here, which is different for each of the modes in Drift. But for mono, it adds some sub oscillators into your sound, which for making bigger, thicker bass sounds is just a really nice thing to have just in one knob here, rather than having to use one of your two oscillators over here just as a sub. What we'll also do is add drift here. So this is the key feature and the namesake of the plugin itself. What this does is it adds some slight detuning to your various oscillators here, including the sub oscillators that are introduced by this mono feature here. I think it also adds some randomization to the filter cutoff frequency and for your different voices in your sound. And we'll also add, maybe does things like add phase noise to LFO. Like I don't really know, but it adds like these subtle imperfections that are inherent to real analog hardware synths to make it sound a bit more organic. So especially the interaction between mono and drift just make the sound like so much thicker. Maybe let's increase the cutoff a little bit there to make it a bit more obvious. But yeah, so that's a perfectly usable bass sound. Cool. And you probably noticed how easy that was. I mean, I didn't have to dive into the mod matrix at all. I didn't have to, map the LFO to a bunch of places to D2 things subtly. I just, like, all the features you need to do that are just right there. And if you really know what you're doing and you get good at this, it doesn't take you more than a few, it doesn't take more than 30 seconds to make that sound. So if I go back to the oscillator section here, I want to talk about the shape feature next. So what this does is alters the behavior of each oscillator, and it's different for each type of waveform here. So I'll get to some of the others in a second, but for the saw wave, it adds kind of a hard sync, which you see in like the visualization down there. So it gives it kind of a more harder, distorted, kind of maybe industrial sound if you want to look at it that way. But like I said, each of the way the shape feature behaves for oscillator 1 is different for each waveform, but it kind of just makes sense depending on what waveform you're on. So like this, like Sawtooth is hard sync, sine wave is wave folding, the pulse width is pulse width modulation, and it just gives you another feature to alter the sound, and the modulation source can be set right next to it. So like, for example, I could use envelope 2 to modulate the hard sync function, which is another pretty common thing that's done in bass sounds, and adding that on top of all the other stuff I've done here, it sounds pretty good. Fuck yeah! All right, so I got a fresh instance of drift here, and let's just make another sound here. And I want to show off the LFO because it has a couple of unique features in it. So first of all, it has a rate that you can adjust based on hertz, cycles per second, and you can sync it just to your tempo, just like really any other LFO and any other synth. It has a number of different waveform shapes, which I think are also pretty obvious or self-explanatory. The amount of the LFO, you can set a global amount here, which affects how much this modulates all the parameters in the entire synth that you have it routed to. But the first unique thing really is you can make the LFO an audio rate oscillator that's synced to oscillator 1. So in effect, Drift can act as a 2-operator FM synthesizer, which is just really neat. So, and this is just ratios of the the harmonic series to oscillator 1. So you can bring it down to 0.25 or 0.5, which is really nice for FM bass sounds, or leave it at 1, or, crank it up to ridiculous amounts to, if you just want to make, glitchy noise bullshit or whatever. I'm just going to leave it at 1 for now. And I'm going to change oscillator 1 to a sine wave and turn off oscillator 2 for now. And so we're just hearing just a sine wave right now, but we can use our our LFO, which is basically just another sine wave operator, to modulate the pitch of oscillator 1, which basically turns it into an FM synthesizer. So it sounds kind of like that. We can also use let me set up the envelopes here to make a plucky sound here. We can also use, we have a modulator here just right next to the LFO amount, which, obviously modulates the amount of LFO we have. So I'm going to use envelope 2 here to modulate this. So it's in effect applying an envelope to the amount of FM that we have being routed into our pitch modulation here. The other thing I think is really cool for like a key or a plucky sound like this is I will add envelope 2 here to the shape and just leave it somewhere low like that. Adjust the filter a bit, and that sounds pretty good. Like I said, the shape, this is a sine wave, and what the shape does for a sine wave is wave folding. You can kind of see it in the display there if you crank it up. So this is just adding a little bit of wave folding to go with the envelope 2, along with the amount of FM that we have in our sound here. Just kind of give it a nice plucky sound. All right. Fun. All right, while we're playing with sine waves, I want to show you another sound that I made, which I think shows off a couple other features here. So this is kind of like a flute lead sound, which is, in order to make a flute type of sound, you start with the sine wave. Let me turn the sub off there. Just the ADSR. So I'll bring up the attack. Make it a little bit slower. And then usually in a flute sound, you get like a burst of air at the beginning of it, which sounds kind of like noise. And Drift does have, in addition to the oscillator 1 and 2, does have a noise oscillator here, which you could set the level of like this. But we don't want, like, that's a bit excessive. We just kind of like want a burst of noise at the beginning of the sound. So the way I'm going to do that is to use the envelope 2 to modulate the level of the noise to kind of decouple it from the amplitude of the sine wave here. And to do modulations that aren't on this front screen here, you go to this mod area on Drift, which has, you can basically have 3 modulation sources and 3 destinations on here. So your modulators are your envelopes, LFO, your key, velocity, and your MPE parameters here. So I'm going to go from envelope 2, and I'm going to route that to noise gain here, which is one of the options. I'll make that 100%. So that's a little bit better, but I'm just going to make it shorter. Maybe turn this up a bit. It's a little bit better. The other thing I'll do, what I also think sounds good on a flute sound, is to add a bit of wave folding, which is modulated by envelope 2. That sounds pretty good. There you go. And that's a flute lead sound, and that's how you use the deeper mod matrix here, and how you can use the noise source. So let's play with this a bit. Sorry, got a bit carried away there. But that's fun. It's a nice sound. All right, let's make a lead sound and show off a couple other features here. So, all right, another fresh instance of drift. Let's make a super pulse type of lead. So this is really easy to do. So you just make oscillator 1. We'll just make it a pulse wave using this bottom one there. We'll just use oscillator 1 for now. And we'll adjust the shape. So what the shape does for this waveform is pulse width modulation. So it can make a narrow pulse, a medium pulse, or just a regular old square wave here. I'll just put it somewhere in the middle. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the mode here, and I'm going to make it go to unison mode. So, and up this to about 50 and about drift to about 50% or so, and then there you go. I did basically nothing, and there you got your super pulse sound. So I'll make some adjustments to the filter. And the envelopes. So it's already pretty cool, but on top of that, I can add some pulse width modulation. So I'll turn the LFO rate up a bit, and then route LFO to the shape parameter, which adds pulse width modulation. That's kind of ridiculous. There you go. Just for fun, why don't I throw some delay and reverb on that and see what that does? Cool. All right, so let's try a pad sound. So I've got a new instance of drift. So basically, first thing for a pad, we'll just bring the filter down to start with, and then the envelopes are usually slower, so we'll make a longer attack, decay, release times on this, around 2 seconds maybe. All right, well, we've got a long way to go. I'm just going to use one oscillator for now, and just to show off something different, I'm going to go with this one here, which is basically it's with the shape at 0, it's a triangle wave, and then with the shape at 1, it's a sawtooth wave. So it gives you a nice means to morph between triangle and a saw wave, which you probably can't tell until I open the filter. So for a pad, I mean, you usually have, you often have an envelope opening up the filter a bit. I just thought it'd be kind of neat to have the envelope also open up the shape on this, just to kind of make the sound more harmonically rich as you hold the key down. So all right, well, that's a start. So we'll turn the drift up a little bit just to make it more of an analog flavor. And then I want to show another mode here, which is stereo. Basically what stereo does is it pans the different voices around in space. So it makes the sound a lot wider, which I think is good for a pad. And especially like between this and turning the drift up, you almost get like a chorus effect almost for free. I mean, that's basically what a chorus is. I'm going to pitch modulate the, use the LFO to modulate the pitch just a little bit, and then also modulate the filter. This may be a bit much. There you go. It's basically every analog pad sound you've ever heard before. Whoops. And then, of course, if we add a lot of reverb and delay, it'll make it a lot richer. All right, and there's your pad sound. All right, so I think I covered most of what Drift can do. The only other thing I want to touch on is the second envelope can actually be turned into a cycling envelope if you hit this little button down here, which basically turns it into another LFO that you can shape pretty extensively and also run it at audio rate. And like you can just end up doing a lot of really crazy shit with it. So like, for example, let's have some fun with this. See what we can do. Let's modulate the filter. We can modulate the filter with envelope 2 and also run the envelope or the LFO at a different rate. Maybe see if we can get a polyrhythmic thing going here. That's kind of fun. Let's see what happens if we run it at audio rate. Holy shit. All right. Well, I think I've paid money to see worse music than that. But I think, hope that demo just shows like the crazy sound design possibilities that are actually possible within Drift that maybe aren't completely obvious when you first look at it. All right. Last thing I got here is just a track I put together over the past week that every single synth sound here is made using Drift. So basically every sound except for the drums. So I'll just play this and let the video run out, and I'll catch you next time. See you later.